Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Tim Grattan podcast right here on YouTube and Spotify. Hope you're having a great work week as it's wrapping up here on this Friday. Have some fun. Hopefully, you have some fun weekend plans for the first weekend of August. Can't believe it's already August. Seems like this year's just flying by. But coming up on the show today, I got a chance to talk with the man, the myth, the legend, Phil Steele. One of those, my bucket list of people to interview. Episode one was Pat Forty from Yahoo Sports. Today is another episode bucket list interviewer, and that is the legend Phil Steele. As college football is wrapping up, as camps are underway here across the South. I was at Alabama's practice on Wednesday for a little bit. Got a chance to hear Coach Kalen DeBoer speak as Alabama had started their season on Wednesday. Auburn here started their season on Thursday, as well as UAB and Jack State, as well as Sanford, as the five schools that we cover here in Central Alabama for major or D1 school status wise. Just can't believe football season's already here. We just had the Major League Baseball trading deadline this past week, and not gonna lie, kind of disappointed on the starter studded moves that didn't happen. But as a someone who supports the Cleveland Guardians, I like the fact that they added another bat and Lane Thomas. I think he's going to add a little bit more offensive productivity to Cleveland's lineup to bulk up their offense once we get the playoffs started. Starting pitching wise, I wish they would have maybe gotten a more established pitcher than getting Alex Cobb, who hasn't pitched at all this season. Just hopefully he's healthy enough to boost Cleveland's pitching staff as they head into the postseason coming up this August. Yankees made a big move getting Jazz Chisholm from the Miami Marlins. Houston Astros made some moves. Seattle Mariners getting Randy Arozarena from the Tampa Bay Rays. The Philly made some moves. Pirates made some small moves at the deadline. So a lot of moving parts, a lot of shaking and baking, and we'll see how the final 2 months of the Major League Baseball season rolls for for those who support Major League Baseball and have fans of those markets that are in playoff contention with the second wild card team added. Also, we have NFL starting up its training camp. That's going on. The Hall of Fame game took place Thursday night in Canton, Ohio, between the Bears and the Houston, the Houston Texans. So we had that going on. Just seems like a slow spot for some folks, but for local TV news who cover sports, definitely a lot going on with football starting up, baseball, in its home stretch for the final 2 months of the season. High school football starting up as well. So a lot of moving parts, a lot of fun things happening, in the sports calendar, and as well as the Olympics going on, which I've watched maybe probably 10 minutes total of the Olympics. And for my WWE fans, this weekend is SummerSlam. So we'll break down, talk about the after effect of SummerSlam in next week's episode. Because for my guest next week, I'll tell you who we have coming on the program next week once we get through this Phil Steele interview, as we talk about SEC football, Big Ten, ACC, Big 12, anything and everything what's going on in college football. So I will catch you guys on the other side of this one-on-one interview with Phil Steele. He'll tell you where to get the magazine. He'll tell you, give him a follow on social media at Phil Steele 042. And I will talk to you guys on the other side. Well, the calendar flips to August now as the Major League Baseball trading deadline is passed. Summer vacations are wrapping up. and college football fall camps are gearing up here in the SEC, as well as many parts of the United States as well. And there's no better person to bring in to talk about college football than the legend himself, Phil Steele, joining us here on the show. Phil, how you doing this afternoon?
I am doing great, Tim. How about yourself?
Doing well, just surviving the Birmingham heat we have today. But thankfully, we're doing this interview inside a nice, cool apartment here. But let's just go ahead and just jump right into it. One of my most fascinating things about the magazine is how much information you jam pack. It's pretty much like a media guide for all 132 FBS teams. Talk to me about the process of like how you get all this information with you and your team and make it so easy that like anybody can like read it and understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Tim. And it is like 134 media guides. And all the information is in the same spot on every page for every team. So, if I asked you, hey, who was the leading rusher for this team? You know exactly where to look. You could close your eyes and point your finger. Who's the starting left tackle for this team? Once again, you know exactly where to look for it. And that I think it makes it a lot easier. It's a full 7 month process putting out this magazine each year. The first write through actually starts the Sunday after Thanksgiving. And I read through every article that is written about the team for the year. It gives me a good ebb and flow of each position and of the overall team. And then I would do the first write through. What kind of shape were they heading into last year? What happened? And then what kind of shape are they heading into this year? The second write through is in the spring. Once we get the spring rosters updated, the freshmen signed, the transfer portals moved in, then you rewrite each of the positions. And the third write through is actually after I talked to the head coaches. And this year I talked to over 120 of the 134 head coaches, going over the team with them. They put my two deep in order, tell me something about each and every player on the team, and then give me their overall wrap up of the position. So it's a long, arduous process, but it's well worth it. It's a labor of love. And this is the 30th year of the magazine.
30 years. And in those 30 years, has the transfer portal impacted the magazine, how you process your information?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, it's affected it two ways. How you process the information, and the second one is when we actually go to the press. We used to be able to go to the press in the middle of May because all the rosters would be updated after spring practice was over. But the last 3 years, we've had to push it back. This year, we went to the press June 7th.
Oh,
Not only the transfer portal closed on April 30th, we knew the players that were in the portal, but we wanted to know where they landed. So we took the entire month of May and the first week of June to find out where each and every player landed. And I was getting texts from coaches 3 days prior to magazine deadline, rewriting some positions as we went along. But it's made it a lot tougher these last 3 years.
no, I mean, I like the transfer portal. I do, but it also I feel like too, it's very confusing, especially where you're trying, if you're a fan of, like, here in Alabama, you have Crimson Tide fans and they're, you're always good at recruiting, but then you're also in the back of your mind, is this player going to leave, or is this, how are we going to fill out the roster here? Where it's like, with Alabama, like they lost Caleb Downs is at Ohio State now. They lost their starting center in the national title game, and then you have fans like, oh, how are we going to figure this out? But that's one of the small problems with or fans that were worried about with Alabama was how are we going to like fill these spots? And then all of a sudden you have the legendary coach Nick Saban announcing his retirement just a few days after the Rose Bowl. Just want to get your thoughts on the Tide this season. Kalen DeBoer comes in, he brings in his high flying offense here to the South. He led Washington to the national championship game last year. Do you think Bama's going to have a little bit of a transition from Nick Saban to Kalen DeBoer? Or do you think this is a positive where you have a mobile quarterback in Jalen Milroe, where it seems like he thrives in using his feet and being mobile to keep plays going on offense?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Tim. When Nick Saban stepped down and the players hit the portal, like you mentioned, Caleb Downs leaving, their center leaving, and other players as well. I thought, okay, Bama's in for maybe an 8-9 win season. That was my original thought process. But after going over the team with Coach DeBoer, and keep in mind, I've gone over Coach DeBoer's teams at Fresno State, at Washington, at Alabama, including last year when he took them to the national championship. I like the additions he's brought in, like a Parker Brailsford at center. If you watch Bama football last year, which everybody here has, there were some snapping problems last year. Well, guess what? Parker Brailsford was the center on the Joe Moore award-winning offensive line. Snapping problems solved. I like the fact he brought in the Lou Groza winner at kicker and brought in a couple of big-time transfers at defensive back to help replace Caleb Downs. Having Jalen Milroe is back is huge. And overall, going over the team with him last year with Washington and this year with Alabama, I actually feel he has more talent this year to work with than he had last year at Washington, and he took them to the national championship game. So I'm bullish on Kalen DeBoer this year. I think they're a legitimate SEC title contender, and I think they clearly will make the playoffs this season.
Do you look at Bama's schedule? They play, Western Kentucky starting out, South Florida. Then they have to go to Wisconsin and Georgia in 2 out of 3 weeks. And then towards the end of the season, they have to go to Oklahoma and then they host Auburn in the Iron Bowl. Do you see Alabama, is 10-2? Is that like a possibility, maybe 9-3 for this year's team?
Well, I would say 10-2 or 11-1. The Georgia game at home, I think, is a winnable game. They're off a bye, so it's not like they're playing directly after the week against Wisconsin. I think I've got them already against Wisconsin, a double-digit favorite in that game. I think they win that one. At the end of the year, the Oklahoma game will be tough. It's the one game this year I've got them a clear underdog. I've got the Georgia game rated as a toss-up, and I do have them favored against Auburn. So I'm looking at 10-2 or 11-3 for Alabama and a playoff berth.
Very nice, very nice. So let's move to the other team in the Iron Bowl. Let's talk about Auburn. Phil, since I've been in Birmingham over 3 years now, to me, I compare Auburn. I'm not gonna lie, I compare them to the Cleveland Browns in a way where before, Kevin Stefanski came in and Andrew Berry, they've run things up in Cleveland, smoothly for the most part. But it seems like Auburn, nothing's consistent with them. They had the Brian Harsin experience. That didn't go well. Now you have Hugh Freeze. There were some people last year that were, the hardcore Auburn fans that were like saying that, like Hugh Freeze, like he's not cut out here. But I feel like Auburn, I think they're gonna surprise some people. I just have that weird feeling, but I also think they're a year away. What are your thoughts on Auburn as we head into this season?
Yeah, Tim, I agree. As far as contending for the SEC title, I do believe they're a year away, but I do think we're going to have an improved Auburn team this year for a couple of reasons. Let's go back to last year. They played three top 10 teams. They played Georgia, Ole Miss, and Alabama. And the Georgia game, they took them to the wire. Ole Miss, they took to the wire. And Alabama, 4th and 31. Need I say more? It's a game Auburn could easily have won last year. Now, this year coming in, I thought that Thorne, their quarterback, struggled because of a below average receiving core. In fact, when I talked to Coach Freeze, he pretty much summed it up as that. This year, they have the most improved receiving core in the country. They not only bring in the Freeze four, they bring in some excellent transfers. So I think Peyton Thorne's a quarterback that's going to be a much improved QB this season. They've got Jarquez Hunter back at running back, a veteran offensive line. The defense is solid. Now, the schedule's not easy. They play a lot of tough teams this year. In fact, Auburn plays Georgia, Alabama, Oklahoma, and Missouri, Texas A&M, Kentucky on the road. Tough schedule, but I think when you look at Auburn, they're a team that is going to be. They've got my number 4 rated special teams. It's Hugh Freeze's second year there, and I see they've got them as my number 12 most improved team in the country. I do think they get to a solid bowl game this year, and even despite the tough schedule, are better than most expect.
Is Auburn one of those teams? Do you also feel like do they have maybe a small percent chance of making a college football playoff spot with the 12 teams this year?
Well, anybody in the SEC does. I mean, if you come out of the SEC even 9-3, I think you have a shot at making the playoff this year. I wouldn't put Auburn in that class right now. I think in the SEC, I've got Georgia up there, I've got Texas up there, I've got Alabama, I've got Ole Miss. Those are my main teams to make the playoff this year. I do think the SEC gets 4 or 5 berths. I would give Auburn a sliver of a chance. As you touched on earlier, Tim, I think they're a year away from actually getting there.
Let's talk. And speaking of like, SEC teams, there's two teams that I'm interested in, and obviously, we'll get to the new guys, so Texas, Oklahoma here in a second. Old Miss and Missouri, they're coming into the season with a lot of hype, and to me, like I think it's great for both those schools to get that hype because, in a way, they're always like the second tier in the SEC, where it's like, if Ole Miss has a great season, it to me like they're like it's a memorable year for like those fan bases and with Missouri as well. But I also have questions, especially with like, Ole Miss. Like, is Lane Kiffin, can you actually get it done over in Oxford? And with Missouri and Eli Drinkwitz, is this just a 1 year deal where, hey, we had a really good season, but can you consistently build on, winning 11 games last year?
Yeah, let's start with Ole Miss. I think they are legit. When you take a look at them, Kiffin has been the king of the transfer portal, as you know. And generally, when you have that kind of roster turnover, it hurts you a little bit. But the good thing for them is they're very high on my experience chart. They actually come in number 13 on the experience chart. Plus, they bring in a ton of transfers on the defensive side of the ball, like Walter Nolan at defensive tackle. That's a huge plus. So, with an improved defense, they've got Jackson Darkbad at quarterback. They could start out the season 6-0, perhaps even 7-0 before they travel to face LSU on the road. The back half of the schedule is winnable. I think they're probably favored in 10 games this year. So I do give Ole Miss a really good shot at making a playoff. Now, Missouri finished in the top 10 last year after their big bowl win over Ohio State. And offensively, they're going to be strong. They've got basically the entire offense back. They've got my number 2 receiving core in the country, a veteran QB. The offensive line looks solid. Question mark would be, I believe they lose 5 draft picks off the defense. Will the defense be as strong? Now, Missouri's big plus this year, out of all the teams in the SEC, they play the easiest schedule. They face Alabama and they face Oklahoma. But other than that, they avoid Texas, Ole Miss, LSU. They miss all of the big boys this year. So they've got the best schedule in the SEC, and that keeps them in the mix. So while I think Ole Miss is the better team, Missouri's got the best schedule, and both are in the mix to make the playoff this year.
Is Texas and Oklahoma now in the SEC? Is Texas a step ahead of Oklahoma in terms of like making it to Atlanta to play for an SEC championship? Or do you see maybe, that gap is not as far apart as some people may not realize that, yes, Texas, they have a lot returning back on offense. Quinn Ewers is, to me, he's one of the top quarterbacks in the country. But I also feel like too, Oklahoma, they're not too far behind on making it to Atlanta for the SEC championship game.
Yeah, I think the two teams are actually very close talent wise. I've rated them number 4 and number 7 in the country in my power poll. And if you're unfamiliar with the magazine, the power poll is my 9 sets of power ratings combined into one. Now, if you gave Oklahoma Texas's schedule this year, I'd have them playing in the SEC title game. But Texas has Texas's schedule this year, and Texas only has 3 SEC road games. One of them's against Vanderbilt, not really a road game, Arkansas, and Texas A&M. They get Georgia at home is their toughest game. They avoid most of the big boys. Oklahoma is, of course, at a neutral site. So I think they have the talent and the schedule to get to the SEC title game. Oklahoma, on the other hand, while I have them number 7 in my power poll, I only have them number 20 in the country. They play the toughest schedule in the SEC. Now, they only have 3 SEC home games this year. One of them is against Bama, another one's against Tennessee. That means 5 are away from home, like Texas, Ole Miss, LSU, Missouri. It is an absolutely brutal schedule for Oklahoma this year, which is why they're number 7 in my power poll, but only number 20 in the country in my overall rankings.
So if you have Texas making it in for the SEC title game, does that mean Georgia is the other team that's going to play for the SEC title?
Yeah, shocker there, huh? Georgia's very talented. Carson Beck, quarterback. They've got the best offensive line in the country. They got my number 3 rated defensive line. They have my number 3 special teams. And here's the thing I love about them, Tim, is the overall depth they have. And this year, now with the playoff, you're going to be playing 15, 16 games. You need to have depth. Well, they go to their 3rd string. You have a lot of guys that would start for other teams. So this is a very experienced Georgia team, a very deep Georgia team. But here's something I'll throw out. I expect them to lose a game, maybe even 2 during the regular season. They play Alabama on the road. They play Texas on the road, and they play Ole Miss on the road. That's three top 10 teams on the road. Plus, they draw Clemson in the non-conference slate. So a very difficult schedule for Georgia. Could drop a game, unlike last year. And I believe they have a 39-game regular season win streak, which they need one more to make it 40, which would be a record. But despite losing a game during the regular season, I do have them making the SEC title game. And once they get there, that game's in Atlanta. I think they win that. And then once they get into the playoff, I think if they made the playoff last year, they would have won it all. I thought they had the best team in college football last year.
So you have, let's see, just going off the top of my head. So you have about like 4 or 5 SEC teams making the playoff this year.
Yes.
What
I
about,
got
well,
I
go ahead.
got Georgia, Texas, Alabama, and probably Ole Miss.
What about let's go to a conference where we're both familiar because of where we're both from. Let's talk about the Big Ten, and we'll start with Ohio State in a way. Is there a lot of pressure on Ryan Day in Columbus this year? Because with the acquisitions they made in the portal and without, beating Michigan for the past 3 years, is this like the all-in year for Ohio State and even for Ryan Day to keep his job in a way?
Hard to believe because Ryan Day's record. But here's the thing: they must beat Michigan. If Ryan Day loses to Michigan, the only way he keeps his job is to win a national championship, which is possible. You could lose to Michigan. Remember a couple of years ago, they lost to Michigan, nearly won the national title. It came up that field goal short in the playoff. But if Ryan Day loses to Michigan and doesn't win the national title, he's gone, despite his record. But I do think they beat Michigan, and they've got Michigan to thank for this year's roster. Why do I say that? Because they only lost 4 players the NFL draft. They could have lost 11 or 12 guys the NFL draft, but there's a whole bunch of players, very talented players on Ohio State that don't have a pair of gold pants. And you only get the gold pants when you beat Michigan, and they haven't beaten Michigan in 3 years. They weren't leaving Ohio State till they got their gold pants, which is this year. And so all those players return. They bring in guys like Quinshon Judkins at running back. They bring in their quarterback from Kansas State. They bring in Caleb Downs at free safety. They are loaded in talent this year. So I think Ohio State does. Ryan Day keeps his job by beating Michigan. They don't have to win a national title, but if they advance in the playoff and beat Michigan, he'll definitely keep his job.
Is Oregon the true number 2 in this year's Big Ten, or could we see, maybe Penn State be that challenger for Ohio State, or even an out of the blue team, like maybe this is Nebraska's year to finally, compete for a Big Ten championship?
Yeah, I think Oregon is the second best team in the Big Ten, and it's not like Mark Helfrich's Oregon team, which was a finesse squad. This team is physical. They rank by number 3 offensive line. The defensive line's top notch. They bring in Dylan Gabriel at quarterback. They got my number 1 receiving core in the country, my number 3 special teams in the country. It is a loaded team, and they get Ohio State in Autzen Stadium. I've actually got them a slight favorite in that game. Wouldn't surprise me if they beat Ohio State in the regular season, but I do think they play Ohio State in the Big Ten title game. The 2 biggest contenders in my mind to those 2, number 1 would be Penn State, which you touched on. And Penn State's had the unfortunate thing of playing in the Big Ten East. They haven't been able to get past Ohio State and Michigan. Well, this year, they don't play Michigan, they don't play Oregon, and they don't play Iowa. That's really nice. I only went dog in 1 game. That's a slight dog at home in Happy Valley against Ohio State. It is a Drew Allar-led quarterback team. He had a 25-2 ratio last year. They have a veteran offensive line, one of the best defenses in the country, and they're solid on special teams. I think Penn State has a chance at 11 wins. I do think they make the playoff. The other team I'm going to take from the Big Ten to make the playoff is actually Iowa. And I know Iowa had a poor offense last year. I mean, their offense was really bad. But keep in mind, Cade McNamara, their starting quarterback, was not 100% the start of the year, then got injured and out for the year. Their backup quarterback didn't even complete 50% of his passes, had negative ratio. Teams could stack the line on him. Their offensive line suffered because of that. Well, this year, and also, by the way, last year they lost their top 2 receiving threats, both tight ends, prior in the first 3 weeks of the season prior to Big Ten play. Well, this year Receiving core's upgraded. Offensive line's the best since 2020. And 2020, they averaged 30 points per game. Cade McNamara's back. They bring in Brendan Sullivan from Northwestern at the quarterback. They've got a very solid set of running backs. One of the best defenses in the country, one of the best special teams. And the only game I've got them an underdog in all year is when they travel to face Ohio State. I can't believe their over/under win total in Vegas is 7.5. I think they go 11-1 and make the playoff this year.
Out of the other new Big Ten teams, from the West Coast, which one of those teams is going to, do you think, struggle in their first year in the Big Ten? And what's the team that's going to, maybe surprise some people in their first season in the new league?
I think two teams are going to struggle. Number one is UCLA. Last year, UCLA played the easiest schedule in the Pac 12. This year, they're playing one of the toughest schedules in the Big Ten. So that's brutal. And they also have a first year head coach. Lost a lot of talent from last year, especially on the defensive side of the ball, including their defense coordinator. I also think Washington's going to struggle. Washington was just in a national title game last year, but a late coaching change. Here's something you'll find funny, Tim. When we contacted the Washington SID and said, hey, send us pictures from guys from last year's team that we can use in this year's magazine. They said, we don't have any. They have zero back on offense, two on defense. It was a little tongue in cheek. They did have a couple of players, but very few. It's a brand new team. Remember, TCU played in a national title game 2 years ago and didn't even make a bowl last year. I think Washington makes a bowl, but it's going to be close. USC is a team that could surprise. Everyone looks at they lose Caleb Williams. Oh, the woe be gone. They won 8 games last year, but really collapsed down the stretch. Now, this year, they bring in UCLA's defense coordinator, D'Anton Lynn, which is a big plus. They bring in a lot of transfers on the defense side of the ball. I think they'll have a vastly improved defense. Offensively, Miller Moss, 6 touchdown passes in the bowl. You know he's going to have a big season under Lincoln Riley. I think they actually top last year's 8-win total. I don't put them in the class of contending for the Big Ten title, but I do think USC is going to have a better than expected year.
And then does Michigan take a step back this season with Harbaugh off to the NFL and all the guys they lost in the NFL draft this past season?
Yeah, the draft is going to hurt them. Defensively, I think they're strong. I rate them the number 5 defense in the country. Special teams are strong. We're in the number 5 special teams. They've got question marks in 2 areas, Tim. Number 1 is quarterback. First of all, who's it going to be? And whoever wins the job, whether it's Alex Orji or one of the other 2 guys, they're not going to get elite quarterback play. And the other one is offensive line. They lose all 5 starters. Now, they've got talent there, but it's tough to replace all 5 starters. The continuity hurts. They play Texas at home. There'll be a dog there. They play Oregon at home. They might be a dog there. And they play Ohio State on the road. So they're not going to run the table, go unbeaten. I expect at least 2 losses. If they're going to make the playoff, they need to beat Oregon at home. I believe it's November 2nd when they play them. That would be their one shot at making the playoff. Lose to Oregon, lose to Texas and Ohio State. I don't think a 9-3 Michigan team makes the playoff this year.
Let's talk about a couple more questions for you, Phil, then we'll wrap it up. Let's talk about the ACC. To me, with all the other off-field stuff that's going on, this conference, to me, it has the potential to be close this season in a way, like with Florida State returning their guys from last year's regular season undefeated team. Miami seems like they're getting a lot of press this offseason. Clemson with Dabo Sweeney, you know that they're always going to be a solid football team. But who's your favorite to come out of the ACC this season?
You know, those 3 teams you just mentioned, Tim, I have them all tied for first. I could make a case for any one of them. Let me hone in on Clemson, though, for a minute, because with Clemson, everybody's beating up Dabo Sweeney because he's not hitting the portal. But guess what? Then they lost 2 or 3 players off the 2 deep to the portal. They may have the best team chemistry of any team in college football. All these guys were recruited to Clemson, play at Clemson. They're not worried about bringing in guys here at this position, that position. And they're all big-time recruits. Kate Klubnik, their quarterback, I believe a 22-2 ratio last year. And I look for him to be improved again this year. He's my number 1 rated quarterback out of high school. Defense is loaded. Offensive line's better. They are a loaded team. Best chemistry, best culture, I think, of any team. Keep your eyes on Clemson. But I got all 3 teams tied for the first. I do think only one ACC team makes a playoff this year, and it'll be whichever one of those 3 can actually win the ACC title game.
In the Big 12, they also bring in new additions to that league. Is the Big 12 is going to be as wide open as everybody says it is, or is it going to be, is Utah like the runaway favorite to win the Big 12 this season?
I could make a case for about 9 teams to win the Big 12, but I did go with Utah. And I do think Utah wins the Big 12 and makes the playoff this year. Last year, they lost 5 games, but they were playing in the Pac 12. And the Pac 12 last year was actually on par with the SEC and the Big 10. Now, it was probably the best the conference had been in 15 years. This year and last year, they played 4 of the big boys on the road: Oregon State, USC, Washington, and Arizona, all on the road, all ranked, and had 5 losses last year. But they lost their backup quarterback in August. Then Cam Rising didn't play. So they were down to their third, fourth, and fifth string quarterback. Teams could stack the line on them, and they struggled. Now, Rising's back. Their backup quarterback, Brandon Rose, is back. They bring in a transfer from Cal Poly and Horde, who is my number 2 quarterback out of high school. Much better at the quarterback position, strong at the line of scrimmage. Whittingham's teams are always in that respect. And they get the toughest teams at home in Rice Eccles, where they've actually only lost 2 games in the last 5 years. So I look for Utah to win the Big 12 and make the playoff and make some noise once they do make the playoff.
There is one more Big 12 team that I would love to get your thoughts on. And yes, I am going to be biased here. I am a fan of this program. Is West Virginia going to make some noise in the Big 12 this season?
Yeah, I remember talking to Neil Brown last preseason, and they were picked last in the Big 12. Not by me. I had them much higher than that, but they were picked last in the Big 12 overall and surprised everybody. And he told me when I talked to him, he goes, Phil, our offensive line's outstanding. Our running backs are outstanding. And true to form, they were. This year, he's highly confident on the team. Now, they do play a tough schedule this year, but I like their 2 quarterbacks led by Garrett Green. They've got they've got the quarterbacks, they've got the run game, they've got the offensive line. Despite a tough schedule, I think they are a contender in the Big 12.
I do get worried that losing Zach Frazier at center for West Virginia might hurt their offensive line. And yeah, it's a very solid unit, but it would be, I wish we could have Zach Frazier back, one more year just to solidify that offensive line. Last final question, and we'll bring it back here to Central Alabama. UAB and Jack State they're the other 2 big Division I schools here in Central Alabama. What are your thoughts on UAB with Trent Dilfer in year 2 with that program, and Rich Rod leading Jack State to their first bowl game and bowl win last season?
Yeah, with UAB, I think they're a much improved team this year. It's year 2 for Trent Dilfer. Last year, they lost a lot of players to the portal due to the coaching change. He brought a lot of newcomers in. They struggled at times. Going over the team with Coach Dilfer this year, I think they are clearly improved. I give them a good shot at making a bowl game this year. And with Jacksonville State, Rich Rod's doing an amazing job. I tell you what, 2 years ago, I did not expect them to have the record they did. Last year, their first year in CUSA, I wasn't expecting. I believe they had double-digit wins last year. It's remarkable. And Rich Rod did it with a whole bunch of new pieces. Now he's got a talented team coming back. I think Jacksonville State, if you're looking for a clear-cut contender for Liberty this year, Jacksonville State's got to be in the mix. The only negative is I believe they play both Liberty and Western Kentucky on the road this year. So that might make him an underdog in both those games and make it tougher for them to make the CUSA title game. But he's doing a remarkable job there.
Bill, yeah, and I like it because for that school making the jump from FCS all the way up to FBS, and they're not like a school where it's like, oh, we're gonna struggle in our first year. And the fact that Rich Rod led them to, 8 regular season wins last year, and just the controversy of them not being eligible for a bowl game at first to now, they were able to play for one of the leagues not having enough teams to qualify for it. I think that's one of the last year's one of the most successful stories in college football. And I'm excited to see, both programs, even like Dilfer at UAB and Rich Rod at Jack State, keeping those 2 programs, winning and doing well. Because to me, if you have here in Alabama, if you have majority of your college programs winning in a way, it's really good for the state, for everybody. Well, unless you want to talk Alabama and Auburn fans, they just don't care for each other. But Phil, thank you for your time. Where can people grab a copy of the magazine, and where can they find you on social media?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Now, naturally, Books a Million is based in Alabama, and we are at Books a Millions right there in Alabama. So make sure you head out there and don't drive around looking for a lot of different places. It's only at Books a Million or at Barnes and Noble. And like I said, Books a Million is heavy in Alabama. Now, if you want to pick it up online, you go to philsteele.com. When you go to philsteele.com, I'm going to charge you a shipping charge, but it costs to mail things. But I give you the digital magazine absolutely free, and the digital magazine is actually updated all the way through September. So Jeff Tedford stepped down at Fresno State. We've got the new head coach there in Tim Skipper, and Utah State got rid of Anderson as head coach. We've got that updated. Players that are lost for the year due to injury in August, we'll have them circled in the magazine, update the write-ups. So go to Books A Million, Barnes and Noble, or philsteele.com.
There it is, folks. The Bible of college football right here. The guru, Phil Steele, breaking everything down for us today. Phil, appreciate your time and hopefully can catch up with you later this college football season.
Sounds great, Tim. Lots of fun talking football with you today.
Thank you to Phil Steele once again for joining us here on the Tim Grattan podcast. Another sensational interview. Phil brings up a lot of good points about with SEC, having four SEC teams making it to the college football playoff. Ohio State, they have a lot of pressure on themselves. They have a chance to, the all in year for Ohio State as well. And I just can't believe, we're 3 weeks away till we start kicking the ball off in the air, week 0, as Florida State and Georgia Tech get ready to play overseas in Ireland. So that'll be something to keep an eye out. College football's almost here, but for next week, have a friend coming on the program. Actually, a mayor. Mayor Rocky Radiff of Sheffield Lake. He'll be joining me next week. Going to take a little bit of a turn from doing sports the last 3 weeks. College football mostly that I've been talking here on the pod. Wanted to expand my horizons because I'm definitely more interested in other things that's just not always about sports. Like there's things that I'm interested in. There's a political question. Hey, why do politicians think this way, or why is this good for for your city or your town? I always curious to see what's the process of you know if there's a new, if you get a grant for a new building from a state, how all that process comes together. We'll have Mayor Rocky Rad from my old hometown, Sheffield Lake, Ohio. He'll be joining me on the show next week. Plus, Mayor Radiff will be at SummerSlam at Cleveland Brown Stadium this weekend, and I'll get his thoughts on what on probably the biggest wrestling shows that Cleveland has hosted in a very long time, and the fact that it's the first WWE outdoor show, and gosh, I don't think they ever hosted an outdoor show, but should be a great. He's a big wrestling fan, so we'll get his thoughts and chat about you know WWE from his eyes, and we'll talk with get it talk about his young political career as well as the mayor of Sheffield Lake, Ohio. So thank you to everybody who listened or watched the program this week, and I will talk to you guys next Friday for another edition of the Tim Grant podcast. Have a great weekend, and I'll talk to y'all later.